Welcome back to our channel. It's amazing to see so many of you are joining us every week for new stories. And for all our old viewers, we thank you for your continued support. We bring you the best in horror and the paranormal. And tonight's story is no different. The one thing about ghost stories that I love, which I think most people will agree with me, is the fact that they aren't just scary, but they also have a human element to them. What I mean by this is that the stories usually revolve around things that people can relate to, like family, friends, or even strangers. And that makes it all the more terrifying when something goes wrong. And speaking of going wrong, what do you do if you find out that your new home has a few uninvited guests? You could try and ignore it, pretend that everything's fine. Or you could do what our protagonist did, try and get rid of it. But sometimes the ghosts don't want to leave. And in the case of tonight's story, the ghosts want revenge. This story was sent to me by one of our subscribers. And just a quick note before I begin. The names and certain identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of the people involved. So let's begin. Our story begins in a small town in Andhra Pradesh. The main character in our story is a young man who is trying to make it big in the city. He works hard as an employee in a private firm in Visakhapatnam, and after a few years of working, he's finally saved enough money to buy a house for his family. He chooses a nice little two-bedroom house in a decent locality and moves in with his wife and kid. Everything seems to be going well until one day the power goes out in the middle of the night. When the man goes to check the circuit breaker, he finds that everything is fine and there's no problem with the wiring. And then he hears strange noises coming from inside the house. He goes back into his room and tries to make sense of the sounds. At first, he thinks it might be some stray animals, but then the sound gets louder and he can make out that it's footsteps. At this point, the man and his wife start to panic. They call up their landlord and ask him if anyone else is in the house. And that's when they find out that they aren't the only ones. The landlord tells them that the house next door has been empty for months now and that no one has lived there since. The couple now knows that the footsteps they heard were not normal. They try to ignore it, but over time, things start to get worse. They can hear chains dragging metal moans. Sometimes they even see the apparition of an old man dragging himself closer and closer to their door. Finally, the man decides that he's had enough. He calls up a priest and asks him to perform a small puja to get rid of whatever is haunting his house. The priest arrives and performs the puja and everything does seem to go back to normal. But then after a few days, it starts again. The footsteps, the dragging chains, the moans. The man is furious at this point. He feels humiliated because he can't control the situation and scared because he doesn't know what is happening. And while all of this is going on, his kid has fallen sick. He takes her to the hospital and the doctors say that she is suffering from a high fever and severe anxiety. This is too much for the man to take. He wants to get rid of whatever is haunting his house. He calls up the priest again and asks him to perform an exorcism. This time the priest agrees and he brings along some holy water from the church. He sprinkles the holy water around the house and asks the ghost to leave peacefully. But the ghost isn't done yet. It wants revenge. As soon as the priest leaves, the ghost starts to make its presence felt. The lights flicker violently and then go out. The ghost drags itself closer to the man's door and starts to bang on it. Terrified, the man runs out of the house with his wife and kids. He never looks back as he drives away. The ghost gets what it wants. The house is empty and free from the living. Moral of the story: it's always better to stay away from haunted houses. That's all for tonight, folks. If you enjoyed this story, tell us in the comments. And if you want more ghost stories, tell us that as well. We'll see you next week with a new story. Until then, sleep well.